Welcome back. In this video, we're going to be moving into a whole new area of statistics called hypothesis testing. And over the last several weeks, we've been talking about a separate area of statistics called estimation. And estimation is when you take a sample and you use your sample to estimate something about the population, such as a mean or a proportion. And when you make your estimate, you say, I'm 95% confident that the unknown statistic is between here and here. So when you do estimation, you create a confidence interval, and the confidence interval is your estimate or your rough idea of the population. And hypothesis testing is different than estimation because in hypothesis testing, you actually have two competing possibilities about the population or populations that you're studying, and you want to make a decision between those two possibilities. And I'll give you a simple example of a hypothesis testing situation before we move forward. So imagine that someone wants to know if working college students tend to get less sleep on average compared to non-working college students. Well, if a person is hoping to answer that question, then there are two possibilities, and one of them is the truth. The two possibilities are college students, uh, working college students are not more sleep deprived on average, and the second one is working college students are more sleep deprived on average. So notice how one of those two possibilities is the truth. They're either not more sleep deprived or they are more sleep deprived. And when a person um, does a hypothesis test in that situation, the person will collect data through random sampling, and the data will lead a person to decide between those two possibilities. So that's an example of a hypothesis test. And hypothesis testing has a lot of vocabulary that goes along with it, just like how other areas of statistics have vocabulary. So the goal of this video is to just introduce you to the vocabulary that's involved in hypothesis testing. This video is meant to teach you the language of hypothesis testing. You might have noticed that throughout this course, we've had a few different videos in which we move into a completely new area of statistics, and the video just teaches you the language and the terms that are used in that area of statistics. And then after that video, we then move ahead to formulas and specific examples. So this is going to be one of those videos that's kind of like a broad video in which we have kind of a broad scope and we look at the language or the concepts of an entire area of statistics. And then after this video, we're going to zoom in and look at specific examples. So let's get into some of the vocabulary. So first of all, we need to know what a hypothesis test is. So a hypothesis test is a statistical procedure that's used to decide between two competing possibilities called a null hypothesis and an alternative hypothesis. Remember I told you that that a hypothesis test is used to decide between two possibilities, and the two possibilities that a person decides between in a hypothesis test have each one has a name. They're called the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis. So let's define them right now. In a hypothesis test, the null hypothesis is the possibility that nothing is happening other than chance or chance variation. And the alternative hypothesis is the opposite of the null hypothesis, and it's the possibility that something is happening other than just random chance. So in a hypothesis test, what you're basically doing is you're collecting data and you're using that data to decide if something is happening other than just random chance variation. And the two possibilities uh, are that nothing is happening other than chance, or something is happening besides chance, and the goal is to decide between those two possibilities. So before we move ahead to specific examples of hypothesis tests, I want to give you just a few everyday life situations that are similar to a hypothesis test, but don't actually use any formulas or calculations. So first of all, imagine that you're driving. Imagine that you're driving a car one day and you hear a strange noise from the engine. Well, and imagine you wonder, am I having car trouble? Well, the null hypothesis would say that you're not having car trouble. The noise just happened because of some chance factor, um, like hitting a bump in the road or something like that. And the alternative hypothesis, the opposite, is the possibility that you are having car trouble. In other words, something is happening other than just chance. Um, or imagine you go outside one day and you sneeze 5 times and you wonder, am I getting sick? Well, in that situation, the null hypothesis is a possibility that nothing is happening other than chance. It's a possibility that you're not sick and you just maybe ran into some dust, um, or just basically the sneezing happened because of chance. And the alternative hypothesis is a possibility that you are getting sick, that something is actually happening other than just chance. So in that situation, um, when you decide between those two possibilities, you're deciding between a null and an alternative. So in a hypothesis test, you have the null hypothesis, the possibility that nothing is happening, and you have the alternative or the opposite to the null hypothesis. And the two symbols are H0 and H1. Um, so actually, before we move on, let me share just one more everyday life example. So imagine um, let's say, imagine you flip a coin 10, let's say you flip a coin 20 times and you get 20 heads, um, 20 times in a row. That's not likely to happen, but it can happen by chance. And if that does happen, and you're wondering, is something wrong with the coin? Then there are actually two possibilities. Well, there's the null hypothesis, the possibility that nothing is happening, and the 20 heads happened simply by chance. And the alternative would be the possibility that the 20 heads didn't happen by chance, that something else is going on other than chance. In other words, something is wrong with the coin, or the coin isn't being tossed fairly, or something other than just random chance. And in the next video, in the next part of this video, we'll continue to our discussion of the language of hypothesis testing.